Holy crap, that's my wife. I knew IT. Okay, so my marriage is kinda on the rocks. We haven't been intimate in a while, you know? My wife, she's a politician, so she's always busy with her campaigns and our kids. I've been relying on porn to, well, take care of myself. And guess what I find tonight? On some website called Elegant Mature Ladies, in the amateur section, there's this HD pic of my wife, totally naked in our bedroom. I mean, talk about a bomb. Not only is it messing with my marriage, but it could blow up into a major political scandal. I take a deep breath and lean back. I gotta process this. Maybe the pic is from like 6 years ago? It's when she got that new haircut. And the bedspread, you can totally see it in the pic. She changed it right after it was taken. I scan her body. Even at 40, she's still smoking hot. She always takes care of herself. It's obvious she puts in the work at the gym. You wouldn't believe she had 2 kids naturally. Except for the nipples, you'd never know she breastfed. She's never had plastic surgery. She's rocking that silver gray hair in the pic. She found some grays and went full silver. Now, she'll put a bit of a light ash toner in her hair once in a while. Then, she styles it into that wavy bob she's known for. I look at her face, she's giving that blank, confident look to the photographer. Those slightly hooded eyes and that Mona Lisa smile. Definitely trying to look seductive. Who was the photographer, anyway? This wasn't a selfie. Her face is sculpted, chiseled, you know? High cheekbones and a sharp jawline and nose. With the hair color, you can't really see her eyebrows. It gives her this kind of ethereal look. You can see her dangly earrings and that faint mole on her neck. It's a mole most people wouldn't even notice, and she covers it easily with her makeup. But I know where to look. And with those specific earrings, my sister designed them, I'm positive it's her. My eyes drift down her body. It's not 18-year-old girl smooth, but it's still pretty damn toned. Besides the mole, her skin is almost flawless. Those boobs, they're bigger than when she was younger, but still on the smaller side. They still have that nice shape with minimal sag. Only the nipples give away that she's a mom. She's got a good, natural curve to her body. She's super fit, but her stomach is still soft and feminine, with a slight curve under her belly button, leading down to her mound and her clearly defined slit. She was waxed around that time. I remember being a bit disappointed. But she said the silver hairs that were starting to appear there were gross. She also said it would spice up our sex life, which I have to admit, it kinda did, along with her change in underwear choices. The pic doesn't show her backside, which, like the rest of her, was in great shape. But those sculpted legs, those are still there. No way. I can almost hear you saying, dude, she's been cheating on you and you didn't even notice? But it doesn't happen overnight, and I have to say I had my suspicions after she changed, but for different reasons. So back to the issue at hand, what to do with this. My initial reaction was shock, and my first thought was to confront her. We always talk about the important things with each other as husband and wife. At least I thought we did, but apparently not so much anymore. When I had my doubts before, we always talked about it and the outcomes were always reasonable and trustworthy. Now I realize I've been duped. It's late now. For some guys, seeing their wife naked online would be $1 million bonanza. But me, nope. No thoughts of self-gratification that night, so I went to sleep. Alone, which has become my usual routine. I'm not usually the angry type, but tonight I was pissed. Congress is in session, and my wife, a local MP, is in Wellington. I obviously didn't sleep much. I suddenly realized that confronting her right away might not be in our best interests. No emotional knee-jerk reactions. We also have to consider the boys, her career, and my career. I gotta figure this out. Who is the key to all of this? Everyone knows the rumors about lonely politicians in Wellington and their hookups over drinks at Bellamy's. God knows Keisha has had a few too many drinks. And sometimes too much. She always seems to keep it together, but I've had to listen to the alcohol addiction alarm bells for a while. Unfortunately, nothing pisses her off more than me suggesting she drink less. This pic was taken before she became an MP, and actually probably just before she was elected to the local council. Why was it taken, and why was it posted? Did she have a long-term fling or even an affair? Maybe this was a rejected stalker getting revenge? Is there anything else online? I'll go back and look, but I didn't find anything that night in my quick glance. I start to think back over our life together, trying to piece together any clues. This picture is a big, glaring puzzle piece of what's clearly our life. We first met when I was in my senior year of high school. She was the daughter of a famous local doctor. He was a racing enthusiast and got Keisha this cute, old, tiny MG. It was a total jalopy. She would pick me up after school. There's nothing cooler than walking out to her car parked out front, me in my school uniform. All the other young guys would be looking at me. She went to a mixed local school. I went to an all-boys school. She was obviously tired of the lame mixed-gender guys. She was also part of a group we called the Main Street Posers, a bunch of posers trying to dress and act like the local gentry. The Brits have a great term for them, hooray Henrys. We loved to lay that on them. In return, the oil slicks called me the George of the Jungle, but we were the cool guys. That's what we called ourselves. Now it sounds so cringy, but we were young, and it worked in terms of impressing Keisha. It was the 80s. We wore those big-shouldered bomber jackets. The cool girls came with us in lingerie over their fluorescent jumpsuits. Keisha was super lively and fun. I always had a blast watching her dance to Talking Heads or some other new wave electronic dance track. Everyone knew her dad, and she was a major trophy catch for a poor kid like me. I was from a once wealthy family, but my businessman dad's small empire collapsed after some bad deals. I have 2 sisters, one's now an architect in Dubai, the other's a jewelry designer in London. My brother is a criminologist. Back then, my designer sister was fresh out of fashion design school. I couldn't afford designer clothes, but she bought them for me. The cool guys included musicians and a couple of rugby players, but we all loved to dress well and party all night when we weren't working hard. Keisha's full name is Maya Keisha Thompson. She didn't like Maya and called herself Keisha. I'd tease her sometimes and call her Maya Keisha. She hated it because she said it sounded American. She was a pixie, like a fairy, always flitting about, ready to dance. She had blonde curls that she flipped over to one side, hanging over her eye like the Kiwi girl in Thompson Twins. She had to have it tightly pinned up for school. I was at my peak during this time. My grades were high. I was on top of the dudedom, and I had the hottest girl in town. Or so I thought. Then that night, it was Guy Fawkes and we were driving down the beach in her tiny MG. Just the 2 of us in the darkness, the sound of the waves crashing behind us. It was a night of teenage passion. I slipped my hand under her skirt and pants. For the first time in my life, I felt feminine fuzz. Then I went through her yellow, fleece-lined mesh to the warm wetness inside. I remember being really surprised. I think it was my first time. I was suddenly driven with passion, and I remember reaching out a finger and smelling the girl's scent on it. We guys called it a stinky finger. I just wanted to know. Now, have you ever had sex in a tiny MG? If you did, you didn't have sex, you just had sex. I consider it an achievement that we pulled it off, and I still remember the moment with a little bit of pride. We only managed it because I was in the passenger seat. Keisha was driving. In the heat of the moment, she tried to get one leg over. It's a miracle she didn't lose her virginity on the gear stick while she crawled over. Anyway, she was a lot smaller than me, and eventually found herself in what we call the cowgirl position nowadays. She was sitting up, staring into my eyes. She sat up and wiggled, lifting each leg in turn, trying to pull her underwear off. In the meantime, I was clumsily getting my trousers off. I couldn't get them down all the way, but between my trousers and my dakes, I got them low enough to take action. Then, in between us, we got down to business in that mysterious place. It was our first time. I'd heard all the stories about loads of blood. But no, she was so wet she just sank into me. There was barely a whimper as she pushed down. Unfortunately, what happened next sealed my fate. Keisha got out of the car and twisted back into the driver's seat while I was fixing my pants. On the way back, she sat up on the gear stick and with a mischievous smile, pulled her skirt up and squatted on the gear stick, hovering for a few seconds like she was going to take root. She seemed to think better of it and rolled over with a thud into the driver's seat. Not to mention the gear stick, the stream went everywhere. It was all awkward and messy. I was in a state of emotional frenzy. And, to this day, I don't know why I said it, but I blurted out something completely inappropriate like, "I hate you for who you are." Why did I say that? She went rigid instantly. I knew right away that I'd made a total mind-numbing blunder and couldn't continue to speak anything remotely sensible. Looking back, I think I wanted to say something dramatic for the occasion. Why? I don't know. I definitely knew about the decline of my family. We had moved from a nice house to a rented place that I was embarrassed about. Maybe Freud would have something to say, perhaps it was envy. We never hung out again. I would call, but basically I was kicked to the curb. I blamed myself for that incident for years, It was my first time and nothing to brag about. The guys never understood our breakup. She was the first girl to break my heart. I was miserable for the whole summer and never really got over it until I started college. But it shows how arrogant I was as a teenager. Did you miss what we call the elephant in the room today? I had unsafe sex with a virgin. Keisha was Catholic, she'd never use a condom on her, and neither would I. The girls we hung out with were on the pill, though. I had a hard time talking to girls about sex, okay? I went to an all-boys school. I assumed she was on the pill. Actually, I kind of brushed it off because I couldn't put the words together to ask her. And we were young and adventurous. It was only years later that I realized she was probably more pissed off at me for that than for anything stupid I said. Anyway, my young, carefree, vivacious blonde girl was gone. I wondered what had happened. I thought I would never have another girl like her. So, I didn't think I'd see her again, but I did. By then, I was in college, and I had done my undergrad, master's, and PhD in the States. Finally, I was able to take a permanent position back in New Zealand. I'm an ecologist. I had the usual girlfriends, lived with a woman for about 4 years, but our careers took us in different directions. It wasn't a bad relationship, we had a certain level of commitment, but I guess the breakup was convenient since we weren't really seeing a future together. We split up amicably, neither of us did anything dramatic to cause the breakup. It allowed me to dive into my work, and during that time, I really went all out and became known for the research I was doing. This led to attending conferences around the world, as well as a pretty busy local speaking schedule. It was at one of these conferences that I bumped into Keisha. I was doing a public talk sponsored by a group of environmental enthusiasts who were involved in a massive riverbank revegetation project. I was the keynote speaker and agreed to spend 2 days at the restoration site where they were holding workshops, as well as doing planting. I was the main presenter at the initial workshop, and I would be helping out and chatting with the volunteers attending the workshops and planting for the rest of the week. I had actually seen Keisha at the supermarket earlier. I didn't really recognize her, but she looked really striking and familiar. She recognized me, coincidentally, and I caught her staring at me. I just put it down to someone thinking they knew me, and nothing more. Coincidentally, she was into the green stuff, but rarely got out. She was a bit of a recluse back then, but she had mentioned meeting me to one of her environmentally minded friends. The friend, Olivia, had convinced her to come to the talk, but more importantly, to come the first morning of the planting. After I did my keynote, Olivia had introduced herself to me and asked if I would come and meet Keisha. I wondered why Keisha hadn't just come over herself, but I did as I was asked. As I approached, my heart started pounding. I think I instinctively felt a connection even before I was told her name. Olivia introduced us and let me know we had been a couple many years ago. After the introductions, I suddenly found myself grinning like an idiot, not really knowing what to say. Olivia helped by asking questions, and suddenly I was telling my life story. Keisha didn't say much about herself, but she mentioned that she used to be an elementary teacher and had done some environmental papers for her Bachelor of Education. It had become her specialty in her classes. We found ourselves talking about the planting and my research. Keisha seemed very interested, and I'm sorry to say, to the exclusion of others at the planting, she took up the rest of the morning. At the end of the morning's activities, I invited her to dinner because I didn't have any plans, but she declined with some mumbled excuse. Olivia was driving her, so when Keisha got in the car, Olivia came back to me. Olivia told me she was taking Keisha out to dinner no matter what, and her husband and she would be there. She named a place Keisha liked and said they would be there at 7 p.m. She added that there would be no problem getting a reservation. With that, I said dinner was on me. Just before she left, she pulled me aside again, in a very mysterious, almost whispered tone, so that those around us couldn't hear. Listen, you may not know this, but Keisha is married, but she was burgled. Her husband was killed trying to protect her, and she was savagely raped, lost a baby. She's got PTSD. She can't teach right now, and she seems to have a lot of trouble with men. She seems different with you. Be gentle with her and be compassionate. Hearing this, I felt genuinely sorry for her. Olivia saw I was a bit stunned. I'm sorry, maybe that was a bit heavy. See if you don't want to go. Oh no, after hearing that, wild horses couldn't drag me away. Besides, I can help, I will help. This probably came at a strategic time in my life. I had become totally immersed in my work. I realized it was an obsession, and I needed some kind of distraction. During that dinner, I think I figured out I was falling for her. I like to think of myself as a good listener. I've had to deal with a lot of students, and I often find myself like a mother hen to them. Because I'm so passionate about my work, it tends to rub off on a lot of them, and it was this kind of motivation with Keisha. I hardly had to say much during that dinner. Keisha was talking about things she had bottled up. I was genuinely interested in her point of view, and she would feel my enthusiastic response. None of this touched on the darker side of her life. Keisha didn't come to the planting the next day, but that night I committed to coming, and she would show me the special places in the bush and the mountains she loved so much. It seemed Olivia and her husband needed to be there, but I understood that Keisha would need the support. The relationship developed from that. I discovered that, other than Harrison, Olivia's husband, and her own father, Keisha had no contact with any other man. Her reluctance to talk about any men in her past left me puzzled. She wouldn't even discuss her husband. I told her I was surprised she even remembered me. To that, she blurted out, how could she not remember her first love? Love. She kicked me to the curb. I responded that she was very important to me at the time, but sometimes the people we love don't feel the same way and forget, like ships passing in the night. Oh, you big iceberg, how could I forget that? I didn't understand what she meant then. But as life went on, I started to realize exactly why she said that. Keisha and I, well, we started to act, I think, like teenagers. I can't remember ever acting as if I was starting to act with her. We found ourselves just impulsively grinning at each other, giggling at silly little things. I had this urge to get her interested in my world, but conversely, I wanted to share her world. I felt our lives starting to merge. Inevitable, it came time for Keisha to accept a date with me, just us. We were so into each other that it was actually embarrassing to be around Harrison and Olivia. For years, I had been serious and earnest, and now that facade was crumbling. It was time for this new me to be a part of this private world just for Keisha and me. Our first date was just dinner and a classical music solo, but it was a bright, perfect evening for me, and I like to think she enjoyed it, too. She gave me a kiss, albeit on the cheek, and I went back to my hotel with tingling cheeks, reliving the moment. We were both grown up now, and I think I had convinced her that I wasn't the arrogant kid I had been. We did go over a bit of our history but never talked about that night. This time I didn't realize I was saying the wrong thing. Keisha visited me with Olivia, and I took her on a tour of the university, introduced her to my colleagues as I gave her a tour of the department, and she loved visiting the labs. Olivia had a private chat with me at one stage that Keisha had been so clingy with me that it was like I was some kind of pet man, almost. She still didn't trust other men. She hoped I wouldn't do anything to disappoint her. Keisha was still very fragile, and her confidence was slow to return. Olivia was worried that Keisha might relapse. I knew at that point I was mentally committed to Keisha, and I told Olivia that. I said in other ways that I was emotionally vulnerable too, and Keisha had figured out how to break down my defenses. I would never intentionally hurt her. I didn't have any other close girlfriends, and because I had spent my life building barriers against smitten students, there would be no distractions. Getting intimate was always a bit of an issue. There was her fear, and my reluctance because I didn't know how to approach her. It started with innocent cuddling on the couch as we watched some mindless TV show. One night when I was visiting her, she asked me to share her bed. This was a big leap. I did. We cuddled and went to sleep in a spooning position. I remember the awkwardness of trying to avoid touching her with my erection. I just put my hand on her belly. About the third time we slept together, she took my hand and placed it on her breast. The feeling of something so soft and intimate instantly gave me a sexual jolt. From then on, instinct took over. She responded by lifting up her nightgown. I'm afraid that months of restraint and the build-up of that night made me lose control. Skin on skin, I let myself be swallowed by her warmth and the waiting wetness. I'd only just gotten in when I came. I was mortified and apologized profusely, but she turned back, facing me, and started to kiss me passionately. The barrier I had just broken signaled our new relationship. As our lovemaking progressed, I was acutely aware of her trauma. I prepared myself to be patient and take my time. I planned for a start that always began with something romantic. It might be a romantic comedy movie, or I would cook a special meal. I thought about the atmosphere. I thought about the gifts. In bed, I was always the ultimate slow burner, massaging her whole body, stroking and massaging, finding her sensitive spots. Finding some responsive touch points, I would stroke, knead, and gently pinch, always assessing her response, and staying there as long as she was in that erotic space. When we reached our most intimate moments, when it was time to enter her, the positions and the penetration were always a little experimental, a little different. One long night of massage, fondling, and oral culminated in her suddenly climaxing just as I entered her. We were in missionary position and I felt her body convulse as her eyes rolled back in her head. It continued for more than a few seconds, then she recovered and sat up. I was freaking out, confused, and asked her if something was wrong. She looked flushed, but she smiled. "Nothing's wrong, my love, my darling. You're the only man who's ever given me an orgasm like that. I've always had to rely on myself." I felt a strange sense of victory. I wasn't looking for praise, and it wasn't just a matter of her having an orgasm. It was the words love and darling applied to me. It was my first time I'd loved before, and now I was just entering a whole new world. Our lovemaking continued with experiments. We tried oral sex. Keisha developed her skills with oral sex, finally perfecting a killer blowjob. For me, Keisha was my project. She eventually moved down to share my little house. She actually took a few papers that my department offered. To help her gain back her confidence and prepare for returning to teaching, we both joined Toastmasters. She finally started substitute teaching, and with her papers, she was offered a position teaching environmental studies to middle school children. Then we decided to get married. It was a very small ceremony. Harrison and Olivia stood up for us as second, and we had a quiet dinner with Keisha and our parents. My sister was overseas at the time and my brother was at a conference in the States. Married life became pretty normal. We were still very close, spending all our free time together. We went to the gym together, mountain biked, and hiked. On the surface, she seemed to have gotten over the PTSD, but I knew it was still there, somewhere. There were some things she couldn't tell me, and the burglary was one of them. It seemed she compensated by being incredibly open about everything else. We even ended up laughing about that night in the tiny MG. She had said she was pretty shocked by what I said that night and thought it was strange that I had said that, but couldn't remember exactly what I had said. I pretended to forget what I had said. I didn't want to revisit that, but I did say that I had been really regretful about it. I told her point blank that she had broken my heart, and she sincerely apologized for it, but said she had been young and inexperienced. I still didn't understand exactly why she broke up with me. One thing I noticed about Keisha very early on was her determination. She wasn't controlling or anything like that, but she could get pretty determined about something she cared about. I guess after being raped, she needed that determination to reset her sex drive. It had limits, of course, like when we tried anal, but we had a pretty good sex life by the end of it all. And I always felt she applied that determination to our relationship, which made it easy for me to trust her in every way. A dark side of Keisha came out in an unfortunate conversation with my brother. She hadn't met him before we were married. That was just circumstance because my brother and I were usually very close. Remember, he's a criminologist. Coincidentally, before he came to visit us, Keisha had been involved in a debate organized through Toastmasters. It was a pretty big deal. I wasn't an active part of the debate, but I was in the audience. The proposition of the debate was New Zealand should get tougher on crime, and do the means justify the ends to achieve this. Keisha's team had accepted the proposition, and therefore the affirmative answer. I was taken aback at how forcefully and eloquently Keisha argued. She certainly won the debate for her team. I wasn't entirely impressed because I disagreed with most of what she said. This was so close to her trauma that I always shied away from the topic. Before this, I honestly didn't know what she thought about it. She was a liberal in almost every other aspect. Clearly, the team had done their research on the topic. They seemed to be a tight group in that regard. The thing is, their evidence relied heavily on celebrity opinions rather than actual facts. I didn't challenge Keisha on it, knowing how sensitive the subject was. Interestingly, the dynamic between Keisha and the team leader, Nicholas Chapman, was interesting. I'd never seen her so close to another man. I didn't know whether it was good or bad. We had our first discussion about fidelity after that debate, but Keisha said I was just jealous. The unfortunate fallout from all this was the accidental mentioning of the debate to my brother. I think Keisha expected my brother, the criminologist, to agree with everything she said, but as an academic he tore apart every part of her argument with actual evidence. Keisha just lost it. I've never seen or heard her so angry before. I thought she was going to attack Jim. She went red in the face and told him to get out of the house right then. When he was gone, She told me not to have anything to do with him and he was never allowed in our house again. I agreed, to a certain extent, but I would never abandon my brother for something that I actually agreed with him about. We kept in touch, but unfortunately, we couldn't share our family life. We met in secret, from time to time. I guess it was Keisha's natural determination that she never backed down from this, and perhaps it should have been a warning sign of the path she was leading us down. I actually sought Olivia's advice on this. She felt I should indulge Keisha on that particular issue because it always brought back the old wounds. In the end, that's the tactic I took. It would be tested later when Keisha joined a lobbying group that Nicholas Chapman was involved with, pushing for changes to the law that would be tougher on so-called criminals. The difference between Keisha and me was that I understood through my brother that, in terms of the system in New Zealand, we had a major mental health problem, and those individuals would end up in the criminal justice system. The guy who had broken into their house was a mental case who had been in prison without proper treatment. He had been released and that's what he did. For Keisha, he was a criminal, and his release was a sign that we weren't tough enough on criminals. In her mind, she thought a harsh sentence would be a deterrent to others like him. She didn't understand that no sentence in this country, even capital punishment, could deter someone in his state. That's all I'll say about that. I just endured. During this time, we had 2 sons, Sam and Tom. Tom was named after Keisha's father. Sam was just a name we both liked. Things settled down with family life. With her busy work and children's activities, Keisha didn't really get involved with the lobbying group a lot during this time, but she still attended meetings from time to time. Getting involved in that group wasn't an activity I would share with her. A difference in interests, the first for us. When the boys were young, Keisha seemed to blossom. All signs of her shyness seemed to disappear. She became a bit of a flamboyant, charming personality that I remembered when I was a teenager. She was definitely popular and a doer. She was the teacher representative at the PTA, and from that, got involved in fundraising. With the boys, she couldn't have been a more dedicated mom. When they were quite little, we spent a year in the States while I was on sabbatical. I was attached to a university. She started a blog about living in the States, and she got quite popular with it, as it also was published in hard copy form in a local community newspaper back home. When we came back, she didn't go back to teaching, so I suppose that's when her extracurricular activities really took off. As the boys got older, I noticed she started to become more distant from them. I found myself being the one to go to their rugby and cricket games, being involved in their school boards, etc. I had a feeling she would have liked a daughter or 2. Our own relationship had become a bit stagnant. After the boys were born, we settled into what you wouldn't call a vibrant sex life. Not what I had been used to in my younger days. I suppose it's part of married life. I did suggest sex therapy at one stage. Goodness me, that went down like a lead balloon. I got thrown some bogus feminist nonsense at me. I figured her sex drive was a bit less than mine, and I just had to entertain myself from time to time. She had her tubes tied, and I had a vasectomy, so it wasn't as if she was afraid of getting pregnant. I sought Olivia's advice on this, asking her about her marriage to Keisha's husband before he was killed. Apparently it hadn't been a great marriage, and Keisha carried a bit of guilt about it, blaming herself. In the end, it seemed to confirm that Keisha didn't have a strong sex drive. Thank heavens for online porn. I think it ultimately saved our marriage for a while. There came a time when Keisha decided to get involved in politics. She joined the council, and with her trademark determination, she went for it. She decided to be an independent, and she used her marriage to me as a springboard for environmental protection. I wondered why she didn't join the Green Party, but she felt she didn't want to be burdened by some of their weirdo stuff, as she put it. She wanted to be a realistic green policy person, according to her. She was elected to the council on the strength of her name recognition alone. During the campaign, we hardly saw her. I didn't know where the money for signs, etc., came from, and then I discovered that Nicholas Chapman was her campaign manager and was integral in her funding. To say I was upset about Nicholas Chapman is an understatement. It seemed to me she was hiding him from me, and I only discovered it through an article about her campaign. I had a feeling the boys and I were just there for the photo op. I was banned from making any public statements, but she misquoted me. For a while, our marriage was on serious ice, and she apologized for not being upfront about Chapman. At that point, I didn't think Keisha was having an affair. As I said, she was determined, and I continued to assume that this was the foundation of her commitment to our family. I guess I was jealous of the time she spent with Chapman in the council, and it made me resentful. Our family slid into a new normal. She dropped some of her extracurricular activities to focus on her council duties, but not the prison reform group that she now spent a lot of time with. We also started going to the gym again, but not always together. She liked me to go with her when she did public appearances on environmental issues. I actually enjoyed that, if only to control her pronouncements. One issue arose when she started calling herself a blue-green. I wondered where she got that from. In New Zealand, a blue-green is someone who is fiscally conservative, but with green leanings. They are known for coming up with wacky ideas like privatizing whales, but we won't go there. I didn't agree with the fact that blue-greens would cherry-pick policies that didn't interfere with their business and farming agenda, even when it was detrimental to the environment. We had another argument about that, but it didn't faze her. She surprised me when she announced out of the blue that she was going to run for parliament. It seemed the local MP had retired for health reasons, and there would be a by-election. She proudly announced that she would bring her two first loves, the environment and prison reform, to the table. Oh boy. Oh well. Yeah, for the sake of my marriage and the boys, I decided I would have to put up with it. You know, our old friend Nicholas Chapman turned out to be her campaign manager. This time, I said that I would agree to her going to Parliament, but I wanted to campaign with her. Her politics weren't the reason, I just wanted to keep a close eye on her. Initially, she was a bit hesitant about that, but in the end, she enthusiastically agreed. I took a leave of absence from the university, and the whole thing was draining a little of the family's finances, but hopefully it would all pay off in the end. It seemed strange to be campaigning for a party that I would never vote for, but you know, some things you do for family happiness. The campaign went well. I had a chilly but courteous relationship with Nicholas, who I couldn't avoid being around. Nicholas clearly wasn't too keen on having me around. It was always interesting to watch the body language between Keisha and Nicholas when I was present. They were always a bit uncomfortable around me. I never caught them in any compromising situation, so continued to think that no affair was going on. There was a lot of political shenanigans going on, and I knew some dirty tricks would be played. I didn't condone it, but I expected it. There were one or two instances where I started to have my doubts. I was excluded from any strategic meetings because I was clearly just eye candy for their campaign. What I did happen to overhear was about finances. I don't know the specifics. What I overheard was that Keisha was suspicious about something. That brought up her debate topic from many years ago, the ends justifying the means. Keisha had some big donors, and the rules around campaign funding are pretty strict. Keisha's not that sharp when it comes to things like that, and relied heavily on Nicholas and his team. Bringing up the ends justifying the means when discussing finances meant that something serious was going on behind the scenes that could carry a high risk for Keisha if things didn't go to plan. I tried to raise the issue with Keisha, but was met with a curt reply that it wasn't any of my business. Our boys were really good about it, and an asset to the campaign, but privately they had the same suspicions as me. For the sake of my marriage, I had to compromise some of my beliefs. I guess I'm guilty of using the ends to justify the means, and even now, I feel guilty for being a hypocrite, I suppose. I smoothed over a lot of the excesses that were going on behind the scenes, so I believe my influence was at least positive from that perspective. It was clear that, throughout the campaign, Nicholas didn't like me, but who cares? It was a two-way street. At least I was keeping Keisha in check, you could say. But it turns out I was only doing the best I could. She won, and with an increased majority from the previous incumbent. We had a great party that night, unfortunately with a group of people who reminded me a lot of the hooray Henrys of my youth. No, I didn't catch Keisha in bed, drunk with Nicholas, but the reality of it all settled in the next morning. Keisha would be spending more than half her life in Wellington with all those big bad bulls and queen bees. My hangover was compounded by a sense of impending doom. I had met a few of them on the campaign trail, and I'm afraid they didn't fill me with confidence, from the Prime Minister down. I decided I would visit Wellington as much as possible, but it's going to be tough. The boys will really miss Keisha now. Yeah, she went to a rugby or cricket game, but you get the feeling it was just for the photo op. In New Zealand, a sports-mad country, a politician needs to put in those appearances. Sam played in the first 15 rugby games at school when they won the regional championship. Keisha went, but really only to show up. Sam was really bummed about that. I went to her swearing in at Parliament, and I noticed that she swore an affirmation instead of an oath. She'd stopped believing in the Catholic faith before I came on the scene, but again, that's something she didn't tell me. I looked around at the other members. She was the best-looking female member there. I thought so anyway. I have to admit, I was pretty proud. That is, until I looked around at the other people. I could see one or two predators eyeing her up with their tongues hanging out, and my pride turned to dread. Yeah, we talked. Yeah, she's committed to the family and me. No, she would never dream of cheating, even though she knows she'll be lonely sometimes. Yes, she does. The thing is, she's been steadily increasing her alcohol intake. A few Bellamy's boozy nights will challenge the question of her sustained resolve. Back to that night of discovery, it was almost dawn when I thought about this. Did I actually have any proof? A photo from 6 years ago or thereabouts, that's when she was running for the council. This photo popped up online after she was sworn into Parliament. I suspect Nicholas Chapman, if she'd moved on to greener pastures in Parliament, maybe he felt left out and posted this to take her down, maybe. Who else? I don't know. There's that chance from when she first got involved with that crime rehabilitation group. She knew Nicholas back then. Damn. Are the boys mine? Nicholas looks a lot like me, but he's short, about Keisha's height. The boys with the dark hair look more like me than Keisha, but both are tall, actually taller than me. Somehow I suspect he's the father, but I'll have to get a DNA test. Is there another scam on the road? Who knows? Maybe that'll come up online. Has she started a new relationship? Based on past evidence, i.e., the nude photo, I'd say anything's possible. I can no longer believe anything Keisha has told me about the past, and why should I now? It's clear she's not as committed to our marriage as any other agenda she has. Thinking of her campaign rhetoric, I reckon that's her law and order goal. This relates to her trauma, and she's on a mission in quoting her very long ago argument that the ends justify the means, even if our marriage was collateral damage. That was my eureka moment. My anger was back. Okay, I decided I wouldn't approach her first with the photo and ask her to explain herself. I decided that I would have to talk to Nicholas's wife first. I had met her a few times during the election campaign. She was generally not involved and a bit aloof. I wondered why. If he was cheating, and it looked like it, she might know about it and be contemplating divorce. I needed the truth. Then I'd talk to the boys and make a decision about our future. I thought Keisha's career wouldn't lead to a sustainable marriage, and there's a picture showing that reconciliation was too late. Or did I want to kill Keisha's career to try to salvage our marriage? Infidelity doesn't always kill a career, and may even make it better. I decided I didn't want to get revenge on her. I didn't want some media circus negatively impacting everyone. I just wanted out. Slipping out under the radar seemed like the best option, but for my own satisfaction, I needed an explanation that wasn't baloney. Even though I had sons, I wanted to believe that I had not wasted all those years. I was sure the boys would side with me. Her political career wouldn't want too much controversy. The boys didn't like politics, and they didn't seem to have anything in common with their mother anymore. She attended birthdays and Christmas at SEDEC, but I bought the presents, even the one Keisha gave me for my last birthday. Keisha never asked about their girlfriends. I don't know why. I was the one who asked them about the info. I was the one who made breakfast for their girlfriends when they unexpectedly emerged from the boys' bedroom in the morning. I eventually didn't sleep that night. I called into the faculty in the morning. This time I didn't have any lectures or crucial meetings, so I decided to get started on what I needed to do. First, I got Nicholas's home number. I knew he wouldn't be there but hoped his wife would be, as she doesn't work. Luckily she was. I was very careful at first. I asked if we could meet for lunch because I needed to discuss some important election campaign results with her. She must have guessed. She didn't say anything, but when she turned up for lunch, she was prepared. I chose a fancy restaurant and offered to pay. I carried my leather briefcase and a hard copy of the photo. I arrived early, and when she arrived, she waved to the manager and headed straight for my table. I ordered drinks, requesting a bottle of Malbec for the table, which was poured into our glasses. We looked at each other in silence for a few seconds, clinked glasses, and sipped our wine. Then Beth, as she introduced herself, asked the inevitable question. She got straight to the point. So what do you want to talk about? Do you think my husband is having an affair with your wife? I don't know, but there's definitely a story somewhere. Well, the answer is he wasn't. She dumped him. But they've been having an affair for a long time. I don't know when it started. She's not the only one for my Nicholas. Anyone else involved? I don't know. Very likely. You know she was banging a cabinet minister. Oh dear. Oh dear, yes, she was. There's something that's been nagging at me. Are my boys mine? God forbid. I guess anything is possible, but looking at them, I'd say they're yours. I took out an A4 copy of Keisha in the nude. Do you know anything about this? Beth nearly dropped her glass, spilling it over the table. A waiter came over and hastily soaked up the red wine. Luckily, none went on our clothes. Beth had composed herself. What has he done now? What has that idiot done? When was this photo taken? Around the time Keisha was running for council. I bet Nicholas took it. He thinks he's a photographer, you know. Where did you get it? It was posted online. No, Beth almost yelled. This has happened before. You know your wife is going to be roasted. But I can tell you right now, the worst is yet to come. Like what? Before I tell you, you need to realize that Keisha dumped Nicholas. Nicholas was in love with Keisha. He built her up, convinced her to run for council and parliament. She never would have done it without Nicholas. When she was banging the cabinet minister, Nicholas went ballistic. I mean, I sort of knew, but he choked me with his love for her and said he'd get her back. He was definitely thinking revenge, and this seems like a revenge post to me. But he should know that when this happens, he will get caught up in it. He's destroying himself as much as her. What is he doing now? Oh, he's strangely normal. I recognize Keisha because I know her, but maybe Nicholas thought no one would recognize her, and he was just getting his jollies from it, something to hold over her. Maybe. He must have other compromising photos. Have you searched? Searched a bit, but nothing turned up. Okay, I can tell you right now that I'm out. There's more to it. There's been some election campaign fund embezzlement. I can't say if your wife is involved, but when it blows up, there's going to be mud slinging all over. If this also gets out, there's going to be hell to pay. So how do you want to play this? I assume you're getting a divorce. I think just slipping away quietly. Keisha believes in what she's doing, and she has obviously sacrificed her family for it. It looks like she wasn't directly involved in the embezzlement, but she might have known a little bit about it. The thing is, if this blows up, we'll all be negatively impacted. There'll be media mayhem. I guess if there's evidence of this and it can be limited, that's the best thing to do, minimize collateral damage. I'm surprised you're not hating her. It's taken a long time for this to come to a head. I've had flashes of anger, but I guess I've adapted. Maybe when the dust settles, my feelings might change. Listen, I can't act on this tomorrow. I believe the Serious Fraud Squad has been alerted, but their investigation is only just beginning. I happen to know this, I won't say how, but my husband doesn't. They will take some time. The investigation will go public at some point, so I guess you'll have to decide how you want to play this now. Well, my career might be threatened too. Yes, I understand you're a professor, right? I'm currently head of department, president of the society, and have some responsibilities. Oh dear, do you want time to think about this? Could you give me a few weeks? I'm not seeing Keisha until the end of the week. I'll sort this out. I'll need a lawyer to advise me on my options and sort out our financial situation. And then of course there are my sons. I can accept that, but stay in touch throughout. Maybe we could have lunch on Friday and catch up. And that's how I left. The following events were unforeseen. They changed everything as far as I was concerned. My anger came back. I spoke to a lawyer, and lawyers like to expedite things, so I filed for divorce. It was Thursday the following week, and on that day, I had a student visit. She was someone I only vaguely recognized. As head of department, I'd met so many students, but it was the start of the academic year, and I hadn't seen her in my office before. My secretary brought her in. I gestured for her to take a seat. I removed my reading glasses. My first thought was that she looked a lot like Keisha when I first started going out with her many years ago, and I said as much, recounting how she looked like my wife when she was younger. I did not expect that response. There's a good reason for that. Her name is Maya Keisha Thompson, isn't it? I stared at her inquisitively. What do you mean? I believe she is my mother. I stared at her. She was a mature student in her 20s. She was older than my sons, I thought. It could happen. But I knew nothing about that possibility. Haven't you contacted her yet? No, I thought she might be shocked. It was a closed adoption. I didn't think she'd want to know me. It was hard to find both of you. This is a real shock for me. Oh, I'm sorry. Don't be, I'm intrigued. Listen, you must have been born long before she and I got married. How did you find me? Maya and you are on my birth certificate? That floored me. What the hell? I didn't know she'd had children. We only knew each other for a short time, but it took years to find each other again. And Maya never told you? I nodded. You call her Maya. Do you know who she is? Oh no, I don't know much. I was just focused on you. She's a member of parliament. Oh dear. Well, she wouldn't want to know me now. It's worse than that. There's a big scandal brewing around her. Oh, I'm sorry, could you be more discreet about this? Of course, I don't want to lose any chance to understand more about the two of you. I need to think about this. Maybe you should just talk to me for now. You'd better tell me all about you. Her attitude was very matter-of-fact. I didn't know if she thought we'd fall into each other's arms, but as the conversation continued, at least my emotions started to warm up, easing the initial shock. Apparently she had enrolled in a degree course that I supervised as part of her journey. She could have got this degree in Auckland, where she's from, but she had chosen to come here to meet her mother through me. Part of her issues were losing her foster parents in an accident. She was feeling lonely and had embarked on the journey of finding her biological parents. Okay, it seems pretty certain that I'm your father, but are you happy to have a DNA test? It'll clear up any doubts, she agreed. I thought I might get the boys tested at the same time. I'm really sorry, this is so silly, but I don't know your name. It's Keith. That's a lovely name, Keith. If I'd named you, I couldn't have given you a better one. What do you like to be called? Keaty. Keaty, would you like to start with a hug and we'll go from there? We did that, but then we hit a snag. Do you think my mom would want to meet me? Sadly, I can't be sure. You know she's an MP, you need to be discreet about this, because this scandal is about to blow up and Keisha will get caught in it. It's going to be complicated. I suggest we hang out regularly while this is all sorted, and then maybe we can see your mom when she's in a good headspace. Later that afternoon, I canceled my other appointments, and we went for a walk and had coffee. She told me about her life, and I told her about ours, even about our initial relationship, but I didn't mention the infidelity and the impending divorce. We said goodbye and arranged to meet again. Keisha was coming on Friday afternoon, but I didn't think it was the right time to tell her. I had to talk to the boys. They knew almost nothing about the possibility of divorce, and it really messed up the conversation. I had Keaty's contact info and arranged to meet her for dinner on Monday. The immediate effect was to make my anger melt away. Keaty was a complete distraction. Losing her foster parents had a terrible impact on her. She was desperate for something stable in her life. It seemed like she was just going from one mess to another. Keaty had stirred up the paternal feelings in me. I really wanted to help her. Suddenly there was a need to get Keisha back for Keaty's sake. I also realized that having Keaty at such a young age must have been really difficult for Keisha. I remembered her comment about me being a large iceberg. Now that comment seemed to make sense. Maybe she thought her life had fallen apart and sunk. That night, I gathered the boys together. There was a lot to take in. They'd suspected for a while what their mom had been up to, so were pretty chill about the prospect of divorce. However, when it came to Keaty, they were really excited. Keaty had given me a photo to show them, and they were seriously smitten with her. It's a shame she's our sister, said Tom. Then I told them what we had to do. I told them their mom's career could be ruined. One option was that she had to resign, she'd be devastated, maybe she would learn her lesson. Maybe the appearance of our daughter might change the game and bring us closer together. Maybe it wouldn't be easy, but what did they think? Well, she's going to have to stop drinking because she's an alcoholic now, Tom said bluntly. If her career falls apart and she's facing divorce, maybe she can admit she has a problem, and we can help her. The boys just shrugged. You're the boss. At that point, I realized they didn't care about Keisha anymore. They no longer had a template for a normal family. I lost another night of sleep. I decided I had to confront her with the whole deal, no way out. I would tell Beth Friday about my plan. I'd tell Keisha on Saturday morning. I needed support. I would ask Olivia down, as this was urgent. However, I'd keep Keaty out of it until we reached some conclusion. I called Olivia in the morning. She knew nothing about what Keisha had been up to and was really hurt and felt that Keisha had done this to her as much as me. She agreed to be there on Saturday morning. I paid for a hotel room and she would come down at the end of that day. I had lunch with Beth. She wasn't happy about what I was going to do but realized I probably had no other choice. We discussed some contingencies just in case things went out of control, She wanted me to wait, but I couldn't. I couldn't be naive when I was so stressed. I had to get it over with. I didn't tell Beth and Olivia about Kitty. I picked up Keisha at the airport. She seemed surprised but pleased to see me. Everything in Wellington seemed to be going really well and great. She asked what I had planned for the weekend. I said I had a few things to sort out and needed to see her on Saturday morning. She started talking about having to go to the election office, and I said, "No, this is important. Olivia's coming down." "Oh, that sounds ominous," she said half-jokingly. I said, "It's pretty serious, but unfortunately I'm not allowed to say anything until Olivia gets here." "What's up with Harrison?" "Look, no, I'm sorry, can we wait until they get here?" That night, the tension was so great the kids went off to the hills. They just didn't want to be around. Luckily, Keisha didn't take it as a sign, because she's used to them coming and going. I could smell alcohol on her breath when Keisha arrived. As soon as we were home, she'd poured herself a gin and was snoring when I went to bed. I lost another night of sleep, but Keisha didn't seem to notice. Olivia arrived early with Harrison, about 8 o'clock. They hadn't had breakfast, so I made them an omelet. We were sitting down to a pot of tea when Keisha sleepily came down in her floral dressing gown. She wanted coffee, so I made espresso and sorted it out. It was time to talk. We'd just made small talk up to that point. Keisha didn't seem to notice how worried Olivia was, so she had no idea what was coming next. I started, "Keisha, there are a few things I want to tell you. This might be a shock, but I won't be long, and you need to listen to me." Keisha looked at me with a terrible look of displeasure. "These are serious issues we need to address. First, everyone knows that you're having an affair with the Justice Minister." Keisha started looking around in panic, but couldn't speak. "Okay, maybe you can keep that quiet, but unfortunately, I've been informed that the Serious Fraud Squad is now investigating your campaign manager, and there's a very high chance you'll be implicated." By now, Keisha had slumped and was staring at me as if in a trance. "Now, I know that you and your campaign manager have been lovers for a while. At least he was in love with you. I can't speak for you. Unfortunately, he seems to believe that you dumped him and is apparently seeking revenge." With that, I brought out the nude photo of Keisha. "Do you know how this photo got online? It looks like it was taken around the time you were elected to the council." The sight caused Keisha to immediately vomit, followed by uncontrollable dry heaving. She soiled her dressing gown and then collapsed on the floor, curled up in her own vomit. Olivia cried, "What have you done, Paul? Was there no better way?" "No, Olivia. The axe is falling. It's better that she knows the consequences now and knows the absolute gravity of the situation she's been led into. She needs to know that she has to talk to the Serious Fraud Squad. We need to get her out of harm's way as quickly as possible. Maybe then we can help her." Harrison was bent over Keisha, who was unmoving and muttering incoherently. "I think we need to get her to the hospital." Eventually, the ambulance arrived and she was taken to the hospital and sedated. Olivia, Harrison, I, and eventually the boys took turns sitting with her. I didn't know how this would all play out, but I felt I still loved her. The hope of a new family life had been reignited with Kitty's appearance. Yes, what had happened was a major betrayal of the boys and me, but she believed she was seeking something better, driven by the trauma of the home invasion. I realized that this would probably be her third and biggest trauma. The first was the pregnancy and the kidnapping of her child. That must have been horrifying for a teenager. Now her passion had been exploited by the bastards around her. I didn't want to be another bastard who let her down. It's possible that this latest trauma will finish her. For the sake of the boys and her newfound daughter, I didn't want to get in the way of her finding new happiness. We needed a way out of this. For the first few days, she was sedated. She was able to give a statement to the Serious Fraud Squad. She couldn't say much except what she suspected. She hadn't done anything wrong herself. Nicholas and 2 others were implicated, but it looked like Keisha would resign from Parliament with honor, accepting responsibility even though she wasn't a party to the embezzlement. At least she maintained her moral high ground by taking responsibility for the actions of those who worked for her. At this point, we ignored her affair with the Justice Minister. If that came out, the media interest would be huge. We'd had a visit from the party representatives trying to keep things quiet. They wanted us to sign a non-disclosure agreement. We refused, but we didn't say anything. I wanted to see what the party would do to encourage us. I hadn't told Keisha about seeking a divorce. I was waiting for the right time. Kitty's arrival had made this path uncertain. Keisha assumed I'd be getting a divorce. We'd discussed it, but I hadn't told her anything else. Unfortunately, as events unfolded, I should have told her what I was thinking. Keisha only mentioned it once. I think she was in denial. We didn't have any worries about Keisha at this point with Kitty's existence. It was clear that Keisha's alcoholism was really serious. We tried to get her into some kind of rehab when she escaped from us. She'd gotten hold of some kind of booze and was drinking herself senseless. She parked her car near Nicholas's house, and when he came out, she tried to run him over. She didn't kill him, but he was seriously injured. She was immediately arrested for attempted murder, but our lawyer got it reduced to grievous bodily harm. The judge sent her to a rehabilitation facility specializing in alcoholism. Eventually she was sentenced to jail, but that included the time she'd been on remand, so it basically worked out to about 6 months. Nicholas and 2 other members of the campaign team were caught taking big donations that were above the allowed limit and hadn't declared them. Worse still, they'd pulled out most of the money for personal spending, including holidays. Women and Nicholas had bought a big speedboat for his own use. They all did time. Keisha's actions blew the whole thing wide open, leading to the justice minister resigning. Keisha's reason for acting included the minister's involvement. It seems Nicholas had introduced the 2 of them. Nicholas had his own ambitions and was looking for favors from the minister. Instead, the minister wanted Keisha all for himself and demanded she dump Nicholas. The story at the trial was about the nude photos Nicholas had, and Keisha wanted them back. It was never revealed that he'd posted one online, but he'd refused to hand over what he had. Those photos were evidence at the trial, but never made public and never leaked. Nicholas's actions and other events around the case, including some attempts by the party to try to manage the publicity, really weakened the government in the polls. It probably contributed to them losing to the opposition in the next election. Keisha's jail sentence at least protected her from the media frenzy. My own career was affected, but I survived thanks to the generous support of some colleagues. Initially, Keisha didn't want to see us in prison, but after about 2 months, she relented, and the boys and I visited Keisha every week. The boys actually reconnected with her. In the 4th month, Keisha surprised me by asking for my brother to visit. It seems that her experiences with the other inmates had led her to a personal Damascene conversion. She'd started to care more about the truth than the biased opinions of those who were willing to use her trauma for their own political ends. Near the end of her jail sentence, I finally told her I'd decided not to get a divorce. The look of joy on her face in that crowded visiting room went straight to my heart. I could see she was holding back. Obviously, she wanted to hug me. I have to admit, I felt the same way. I glanced at a nearby prison officer who was frowning at us as Keisha and I were leaning into each other. I could read the officer's thoughts: no touching, no smuggling. Her release from prison was a huge relief for the family, but thankfully there wasn't much media attention. Out of prison, I arranged a few days away for the 2 of us where we'd be undisturbed. I wanted to hear her story. We rented a cabin near a lake. We sat on warm evenings, watching the sun slowly sink below the horizon. Sitting on the windless grass, we watched the welcome swallows flitting around to catch their supper over the orange-hued reflection of the lake in front of us. After the chaos that was our lives, it seemed like we'd finally achieved peace. Keisha explained that she finally felt totally used. The party wanted her stories about the environment and her determination to be tougher on crime to get votes. When she got into Parliament, she discovered the cabinet had no intention of doing any of that. It was all just populist rhetoric. Keisha continued to trap herself. The Justice Minister was the most powerful man in cabinet. She'd really fallen for him, and he'd convinced her that he'd swing the cabinet for her. But what he really wanted was power over her through her body. It wasn't just a fling. She saw he was ruthless and had no empathy. She'd been compromised. He'd exploited her loyalty to the party and her determination for her goals to essentially enslave her. When she was in Wellington, he had her stay in his apartment almost every night alone. He was callous and demanded her body for his own gratification. Things got worse when he started raping her anally. She'd go into a frenzy, and he'd slap her, telling her to toughen up if she wanted to get ahead in Parliament. She'd panic thinking about going to his apartment, but it was also mechanically driven. She used alcohol to numb herself. When it all blew up, she'd crumbled, but after getting through the alcohol treatment, she started to understand that this last exposure had actually saved her. In prison, she'd found other women who had empathy for her. These were women she'd previously scorned, along with all the crims. Her experiences had caused a shift in her thinking. That's why she wanted to meet my brother. Keisha realized that she was so isolated and obsessed that she didn't understand she was being used for other agendas and exploited for her determination and energy. Now she realized that her punitive goals were misguided and wanted to work for a different kind of criminal justice reform. It was late that night. We were in bed in our cabin. Outside, an owl, a moor pork, was calling for its mate in a nearby tree. All our previous tension had disappeared. At that point, it seemed that restoring our previous relationship was still not possible. We were fundamentally different, each with our own experiences of the past events. But we lay in peace, each willing to commit to the other. We needed each other, and that was the truth. For the new future, I had a wild card. It was Kitty. By then I knew that Kitty, along with my sons, were mine biologically. Suddenly, I told Keisha that I knew she had had a child with us years ago. Keisha sat bolt upright. How? I told her the story and Keisha started to cry, burying her head in my shoulder. Keisha knew the child was a girl but never knew her name. Kitty was another cross that Keisha had to bear. She had been forced to give her up, and it was why she'd rejected the church. She had been treated cruelly by both her parents and the church. Neither of us slept after that. The next morning, Keisha wanted to leave immediately and see Kitty, and it was a tearful meeting. What better reason did we have for a final party to welcome Kitty into our lives? All our old friends were introduced to our new family. A surprising outcome. Kitty had been sitting quietly at the back watching the drama unfold around Keisha. One night after the party, Keith said she had never thought of her mother as Keisha, but as Maya, and in her dreams she'd thought of Linda and Lindy. For short. Keith hated the dirty political drama and she associated the name Keisha with that. In her dreams, none of this fitted with her ideal mother, Maya. I'd arranged a sabbatical to a university in the UK. Our sons were now at university, and Keith had just finished her first year of university. We decided to take Keith on the sabbatical with us as a way to solidify our relationship. On the way, we met my two sisters in London, both of whom absolutely loved our new family member. While we were having dinner with my sisters, Kitty mentioned her wish that Keisha could be her Maya, the mother of her dreams. Keisha didn't say much but seemed pensive throughout that conversation. Completing my work in the UK, we had a holiday in the Greek islands before returning home. There, Keisha became Maya, putting Keisha into history. It wasn't easy, but we recovered. Maya had a friend, as well as her daughter Kitty. She was her BF. Kitty had a fiancé who she was very, very serious about, and Maya totally approved. They're planning a wedding, and Maya is playing with some grandkids. The boys are putting it off. It's a different relationship now with Maya, but still a loving one. Sexually, we've found a new lease on life. It's true we've been to some counseling sessions. It seems Keisha has been having some advanced fun while I was missing out in the dark years. It was really a new experience. Now when I watch porn, I have Maya beside me, and that leads down all sorts of avenues. With the first name Maya, she has a new moral purpose. A new and very comfortable Maya could now talk about her past with me, and this caused her to exclaim as we were discussing our adventures, "You know, I learned a big lesson from all of this. The moral truth of the means must reflect your goals." I replied, "So, you wouldn't go against your moral principles in your next project?" "No, it would raise big questions about whether this project was actually morally worthwhile." "Amen. I'm obviously safe," I chuckled. "That's going to be the proposal for your next Toastmasters debate." Bugger Toastmasters, damn it, no need for verification. And with that, Maya snuggled up to me, resting her head on my shoulder. Yes, I was safe. What about the photo online? It's still on the internet, but otherwise, it was never made public as Keisha MP. Nicholas never confessed or used its existence. I guess he didn't want to be charged under the harmful digital communications law, which was added to his sentence. Oh, by the way, Maya has a new hairstyle and color. It would be hard to recognize her as the Keisha of those days. Yes, and happily her pubic hair is back, a joy.